Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm honored and privileged to be the last speaker of today. And I think I deserve a big round of applause for that. Thank you. My name is Ayhan. I'm coming from South Africa. I'm the director of one of the Hizmet affiliated institutions. So I am more practitioner than the academic, actually. So being a practitioner in the Hizmet context in Southern Africa, I've been dealing with around 10, 11 countries. So I work with the Hizmet institutions and the people who are actively part of the Hizmet movement in Southern Africa. So by saying that, I've been observing significant change in the demographic and the institutional, structure of the Hizmet movement in Southern Africa. I'm sure you can guess why, because of, political oppression in Turkey and the long arms of, the authorities in Turkey. Unfortunately, many of the Turkish origin Hizmet people, they had to leave the countries that they were serving. So as a result, the visibility and the responsibility of non-Turkish, particularly local African participants, their visibility increased remarkably. And these individuals are no longer peripheral actors. They are now central to the daily functioning and the continuity and the public representation of the Hizmet initiatives in Southern Africa. So this transformation raised a set of questions for me as a practitioner in the Hizmet context, and how Hizmet identity being shaped among non-Turkish participants. This was the first one. And how do they understand themselves within the movement? And what form of belonging, ownership, and the responsibility do they experience? So it was this lived tension between expanding participation and evolving identity that motivated me to undertake this research. So this is not only analytical, also a kind of reflective study for me. And the other reason, actually, I wanted to do this research, because when you look at the literature about Hizmet movement, and usually you find, and the literature still assumes Turkish leadership as a normative in the movement, Turkish cultural memory as central, and the non-Turkish actors as recipients rather than the agents. So I want to see and invert the gaze of this perspective, and by centering non-Turkish voices and treating them not as extensions of the movement, but as co-constitutive subjects. So there were two questions I focused on, as briefly mentioned in the beginning. How do non-Turkish participants understand and relate to Hizmet's cultural, spiritual, and organizational identity? Do they experience themselves as the co-owners or invited guests in the movement? And how are their voice heard, their cultural and intellectual contributions acknowledged or contested in the movement? So the methodology says, so there were 15 people. I conducted, I think, 11 interviews with 15 non-Turkish African participants. And interestingly, 4 of them were non-Muslims, actively being part of Hizmet movement at the institutions of the Hizmet. And they were teachers, coordinators, and the senior figures in the movement. And their experience and participation in the movement between 3 and 20 years. So I'm just going to talk about, what I found from these interviews. So across all interviews, participants articulated a strikingly consistent understanding of Hizmet as a moral and ethical project rather than an ethnic, national, or culturally Turkish movement. So this was quite significant. And Hizmet was repeatedly described as a way of life, a moral compass, or a practice of service, rather than as an organization tied to Anatolian history and Turkish identity. So participants overwhelmingly framed Hizmet through concepts such as living for others, serving humanity for the sake of God, and reviving the prophetic ethic in the contemporary life. And importantly, this ethical framing was not abstract. So interviews consistently connecting all these values and the principles of the Hizmet movement in their lives and their own realities. And many described how Hizmet reshaped their daily conduct, professional ethics, and the interpersonal relationship. And one of them said, I quote, "When you read Hoca Efendi's book, you don't only get religion or philosophy. You get a wider perception of the world. It affects how you speak, how you argue, and how you live." End of quote. And a key empirical pattern is what may be described as vernacularization. Participants actively translated all these Hizmet principles and the values in their own cultural and social context. And it shows that they are passively, they didn't adapt all these values in their own lives. So my African friends, they will, and maybe some of you know about the Ubuntu philosophy in Africa. And they were repeatedly talking about Ubuntu and the connection with Ubuntu and the Hizmet values. And one of them said, "In Africa, I am because we are." That is exactly what Hizmet teaches, living for others, not for yourself. So this synthesis indicates that for non-Turkish participants, Hizmet identity is uprooted. So its moral authority no longer derives from the Turkish origins, but its local ethical resonance and the practical usefulness in addressing social challenges in their own communities, such as inequality, quality education, or moral formation. So this is the key finding for my question 1. So non-Turkish participants internalize Hizmet as a universal ethical praxis rather than a culturally specific movement originated from Turkey. Hizmet's identity as lived in Southern Africa is morally indigenous, spiritually meaningful, and professionally formative. At that level of values and meaning, Hizmet is already experienced as theirs. So while moral and emotional identification with Hizmet was consistently strong, participants' accounts revealed a more ambivalent and layered experience of belonging and ownership. None of the interviews described themselves as outsiders, yet few articulated an unqualified sense of being full institutional co-owners of the movement. Recurring distinctions emerged from these interviews between relational belonging and the institutional ownership. On the relational level, participants described Hizmet spaces, particularly where they, active, like dormitories, school settings, very familial and deeply meaningful. One of them said, "These brothers became my family. I trust them more than my own relatives. That is why I am here." However, this sense of emotional inclusion often did not translate into confidence about one's place in the movement's long-term future. Several participants described themselves as contributors or implementers, rather than co-authors of Hizmet's vision. And one of them said, I quote, "I feel that I am doing Hizmet, yet, yes, but to say that I am fully part of the Hizmet, maybe 70 or 75%. So this notion of partial belonging serves as an important diagnostic marker. It reflects not alienation, but institutional liminality. Participants are inside the movement, trusted in daily responsibilities, yet uncertain about their influence over strategic vision, leadership trajectories, and institutional memory. And they also described as a family, home, a place of trust and the sacrifice. Yet at the same time, many felt absent from the movement's long-term imagination. Notably, even participants who expressed gratitude, loyalty, and the long-term commitment acknowledged that Hizmet could continue without them, suggesting a limited sense of structural indispensability.
Even if only 10 minutes of your time is gone, I have to interrupt you because on the outside the class and their teacher are waiting to go inside for their class. So I wasn't aware of that. I was just informed.
Okay, but it took almost 12, 13 hours to, come here from South Africa.
I know.
Long way. I pay too much money, and you are, taking my time. Okay,
I don't know, but how did you agree with them outside?
You are just the messenger.
Okay, so let's finish, and then we don't have any Q&A,
okay.
and then we have to stop it like that.
Okay, just 5 minutes.
5 more minutes, yes?
Yes. Yes, I'll finish.
Okay.
Promise. Yes, so they feel they feel at home, but they are not owner of the home. They don't feel the ownership of the home. Okay, so I'm just deciding what to talk. Okay, in terms of their voice, if their voice are heard or not. So the third major finding concerns how participants' cultural and intellectual contributions are recognized and integrated within the movement, and in daily operational, work of the Hizmet movement locally, yes, because they are local, they know everything about the local dynamics, and when they suggest something about, the daily operations of the, the Hizmet activities, yes, they are valued, their suggestions are implemented. But in terms of, again, coming to the bigger programs and what needs a kind of direction, so there is a very limited consultation with them. Okay, I can just jump to the conclusion quickly. Okay, so the metaphor of unfolding the tent, so it was my metaphor for this research, whether the tent is unfolded or not, and how this tent was structured. So unfolding the tent captures both achievements and the challenge. Hizmet has succeeded in expanding its moral and human reach across the borders. Its unfinished task lies in the translating that moral universality into institutional practices that reflect mutual trust, distributed authority, and the true co-ownership. I think how this tension is navigated will significantly shape the Hizmet's long-term resilience, credibility, and the ethical resonance as a true transnational civic society movement. Thank you very much.